This is Loretta van der Tann that works at the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute, where she is working on a research project called Under Oslo and is responsible for what we in academia called work packages, et spesifikt område i et forskningsprosjekt that relates to holistic planning. She also calls her lecture The Underground as Showstopper. Vær så god, Loretta.
Thank you. I'm feeling really honored to be here. The presentations, I think, by Caroline and also Elizabeth really gave a very good frame for what I'm going to talk about, and some of the topics I'm going to touch upon will, you will recognize already from the previous lectures. Having researched this kind of interface between planning and geotechnical engineering for several years, it makes me really hopeful that this topic is taken up at a planning meeting like this one. So today I'm going to represent the perspective of geotechnical engineers and reflecting on the question of if the underground is a showstopper. Probably most engineers would say it isn't. We can build anything, they would say, as long as we have sufficient information and enough money. The question is rather, is it smart to build the way we are going to build? And this is actually the starting question of that project Under Oslo. As you can see down here, alt er mulig under bakken, gjør vi det på det smarteste måten. I'm not sure if I did say that as correct pronunciation. I'm privileged to work at NGI along with very experienced colleagues on that topic. In particular, Gunnar Bartvik and Jenny Langford, who also have helped me to put together this presentation. I'm going to start my presentation with this quote by a geologist, Jackie Skipper, who said most of the ground is underground and therefore invisible. This leads to inaccurate preconceptions. So basically what she says is the problem of geology is that it's invisible. And that might seem kind of logical or, but I think actually it's really important because as we can't see it, it might lead to us taking decisions based on the wrong assumptions. And I want to reflect on 3 questions that I think planners think a lot about, but in which, in my view, the underground could be considered more or earlier. And these questions are, where do we build? What are the implications of this decision? And what do we prioritize or protect? So where to build? These are 2 satellite images of 2 potential sites for a new warehouse in Hurumlandet. And I'm not sure what the planner sees when he or she looks at these 2 satellite images, but probably they think about access, about effects on neighbors, things like that. What I see is that on the left we have a quarry, a rock quarry, and on the right we have flat land. So in essence, for me, that means that on the left we have rock, and on the right we probably have sediments. If we look at the geological map that shows true, so on the right we actually have thick marine sediments, which means that it's much more difficult to build on this side on the right than on the left. It becomes more complicated when we think about where to build, when we think about infrastructure. And actually, I think the infrastructure is always connected to these specific developments. Because when we build infrastructure, we have a lot of sites, basically. We have to think along the whole route. And so this is the plan for a new railway, Ringeriksbanen, from Sandvika to Hønefoss, which then continues on to Bergen. And it's here in Hønefoss, it passes by the city, basically a bit on the side. But because the station is inside of the city, and I was told that it was a strategic decision to keep the stations in the cities, the train has to branch out to the city, stop here, and then go back. There are many things one could think about that and say about that, but what I want to draw your attention to is this area here, which is what is called the Great Cut. And you can see there's currently only 1 track, But for this new project, they need a second track to go into the city. And you can see that this is kind of the model of the current project, that there are houses quite close to the top of the cutting, and that in the current plan, the cutting will be filled over. So it will look more like a cut and cover structure. Why this is important from a geotechnical perspective is that this was actually really difficult to build. So when it was built, several people died. I think 3 people died. And if you look at the picture on the left, which is what it looks like now, this is not obvious. It looks actually not very frightening, right? The slopes on the left. But several people died, and I leave it to you to think about what it means to cut now back into the slope, which came down several times when it was built the first time. So this problem of not being able to see, what a slope or how stable a slope might be is very typical for this condition here in Norway, which is called quick clay. I'm sure you all know about it, but it's basically sensitive clays that can change their structure and basically become liquid. And I'm sure you're all aware of that following the tragedy last year in Gjerdrum. But it's not very easy to see if you don't know what is underground. So if I show you these 2 pictures, one of them is quick clay and the other one is a fairly stable sediment, a moraine. Can you see instantly which is where? I'll tell you the left one is a quick clay. So basically there are lots of implications of when we decide where to build. I'll give you another example that is a bit different, and that was also already mentioned by Elizabeth. So this is the new government quarter in the middle of Oslo, and here on the right, this is kind of our impression of, an impression of what it shall look like, and that is what we imagine it to be. But at the moment, it looks like this. So this picture was taken a few weeks ago, and you see that it's basically a big hole on the ground at the moment. And I want to just draw your attention to here on the right. I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but there's a black rock. It looks like this. So this is the rock formation under there, which is called alum shale. And you might even think this doesn't really look like a rock, right? Because it's so weathered that it more looks like a gravel or like a sediment, but it's a rock. And it actually is quite a big environmental challenge here in Norway. So this rock, when it comes in contact with air and water, it oxidizes and it becomes very, it leaks an acid that becomes very damaging to any concrete or steel that is in touch with it. And that means that if we want to build in it, we need to seal it, which you can see at the back here. We need to seal it against the new structure that we are going to build. And I was also told that the structure they demolished here was very, very damaged. So they could, basically the concrete looked a bit like the shale. The other implication it has that is, I think, probably too little talked about is because of the condition, or because of the composition of this rock, it can't be deposited, it can't be reused for, and it can't even be deposited in the same way as clean soils. So it has to be transported to special deposit sites, of which there are only 3 in Norway where you can put this soil, and one of them is this island, Langøya. So it has to be transported all the way down here to Holmestrand by lorry, and then it goes on a ship over here to Langøya, where it gets treated and stays. That means there's a lot of heavy transport in this little city here, Holmestrand, which is another story of, the operator of Langøya trying to build a new harbor and so on. But it's basically, in a way, secondary implications of our decisions where to build and how deep to build. So yeah, so the last example I want to give is the Colosseum Cinema here in Oslo in Majorstuen. How am I with time? Just okay. It's in Majorstuen. So this is the Colosseum Cinema. It's the biggest cinema in Northern Europe and a very beautiful building. And it burnt down in 1963 and was rebuilt with a thin concrete dome, and now it looks like this. And it's built on lap foundation, so it's built directly on the clay. And that means that it will move. If the clay underneath, if the ground underneath experience movements, the building will move with it. And the clay experiences movements, for example, because of construction activity in the vicinity. And there's a lot of that construction activity in the vicinity. So you see all these red buildings here in the area. This is the Colosseum. All these red buildings have been developed since or had changes since. And in particular, this building was developed in 1990, and the Colosseum itself was extended in 1997. And here you can see the settlement the building experienced in that time. So you see that it had settlements of up to 25 centimeters on one side. You can also see that the settlements differ between the two sides. So the red ones are the settlements to this side here, and the blue lines show settlements up here. So that means that there is a kind of differential settlement, and the building starts to skew. So since then, all the other buildings have been developed. And because the extension of the cinema has been built on piles, so that one doesn't move with the construction activity in the vicinity, this is what happened. So you have huge cracks between the two building parts. And this door didn't open anymore, and that's the door to the candy store. So that's obviously very important. So that's why the NGI was called. And yeah, but basically the question that comes out of this is, I don't know how many more settlements a building can take, but I know that probably they are limited for a structure like this concrete dome. And now this building here is going to be developed. This is an impression of what it shall look like. And a side fact maybe, but the owner of this building has now bought the Colosseum. What that means, I don't know, but it's just maybe something to think about. But what I want to just point out in this is that all these buildings don't really stand in isolation. We tend to look at each of these projects in isolation, but there is kind of an accumulative impact that comes through, what's happening underground. And there is, I think, where it needs more strategic planning. It needs looking at the whole area and understanding and deciding what we want to prioritize, which developments do we want to prioritize, and or what do we want to protect. So I would just want to finish going back to this kind of invisibility, because another point that comes with it is that it's unpredictable, the material. So just because we are specialists, we still can't see the geology. And that means that it remains complex, and we still have to maintain a healthy respect for surprises, so that we still will be surprised. It also means that we often can give an indication for what might happen, but not a very precise prediction. And that is something that I think we need to talk about with planners, and we need planners to understand, and we need to understand how these uncertainties can be better communicated in your direction. And I think that's it. And with that, I'll hand over to Ingela.